you can start.
Okay. Yeah, cool. So excited to start this edition of the Consortium Forum. There has a lot been happening, not just in idOS, but also in the world in general, and in Web3 identity and storage. I mean, if you're thinking back of the last 6 weeks, then we had the big Coinbase hack, which put a lot of attention on where do we store our data, how would we want identification to work. We had a big debate on, like, is that actually how we want to do things, and what better system do exist, right? That conversation has died down a little bit. We hope that we can pick it back up and actually propose a better solution. We also had some other identity protocols, decentralized protocols, get some attention on their not so privacy preserving features, especially when it comes to biometrics. And that was also a big debate. And also there we want to propose an alternative. So what's our strong stance? What we believe is in idOS that we actually need to solve the big problems that we have, the ones that are uncomfortable to touch. And even though the idOS can be used for many things, for personal data storage, for KYC reusability, for proof of personhood, we believe that one of the boom factors in the industry, so the stable token economy, is where it's mostly needed, not just to make it super smooth so that we can compete against monolithic banks that onboard users just once, but also for platform risk and data security reasons. There's something that we are working on that is around biometrics that we're going to share later, that I'm quite excited about, that will help us solve Sybil resistance. But financial services is really where our attention is at. And the growth of the stable token economy is just something where, you know, we've just been in New York for StableCon. It's still an early industry, but it's an industry that is just jumping from all-time highs to all-time highs when it comes to stable token usage and adoption, and replacement basically of fintech, the fintech infrastructure rails. So I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but like even the big fintech companies are very much converging with crypto exchanges and offering the same, some of the biggest, if not the biggest, fintech offering similar services. So I don't want to just talk about it. I also want to hear your ideas, specifically what you think makes a great identity system. From our point of view, you know, this clear data availability, data privacy, but also the ability to have biometric systems in there. We've seen the launch of some other potential solutions like like Metri, the Gnolls, very network-based alternative, which we just feel is a good addition to what we're building. But we are very much like the idea of having a system where a user, a human person, counts no matter what, no matter their relationships that they have, no matter the economic abilities that they have, but solely based on them being a human. And that's just one trait that we all have, is that we have unique biometric identifiers. And so just building them into the system in a way that they are not creepy, they are not excluding, is something that's quite important to us. But I really, please feel free to jump in at any point. I would really like to hear what you think, if there's something that we're missing when it comes to building a great identity system. So identity is very easy to be just a feature. And what I mean with that is you usually need identity for something. You're not waking up in the morning and saying, well, I need an identity today. You need an identity to open up a bank account or to make sure that someone trusts you because you want to take a loan or because you want to easily register and onboard to a certain service, right? Or to grant trust to an Airbnb host that to make sure you're a real person, to establish accountability. So the reason why identity hasn't taken off as a widely adopted primitive on the internet or in Web3 even specifically is because we see that it's so hard to solve because you really need an end-to-end solution. So from the user perspective, you know, it needs to be really smooth. It needs to be seamless. It needs to be privacy preserving, and it needs to be secure. I mean, people sometimes care about it, but mostly don't, and only care about it once this is not true, right? Like once they learn that someone has used their data against their wishes or that the data has been leaked. From a regulatory perspective, it needs to be something that people can actually use, saying, if you want to use it for regulatory onboarding and it doesn't work, you know, looking a little bit of towards standalone ZK solutions here, for example, for KYC onboarding, it doesn't solve that purpose. And so even if you would want to use it, you can't because it's not fit for purpose. And on the company perspective, you know, it's the same thing. It needs to be great. It needs to be not too expensive. It needs to be easy to maintain, all of these things. So it's actually really hard to build that. But this is what we're really focusing on. We see that there is a huge swath of new companies coming on that are actually rivaling neobanks. You know, if you look at MetaMask, they kind of look like your regular fintech neobank these days, and they're actually available on a global scale. That is something that we're extremely excited about, and all of these folks are running into the same problem of KYC, needing to KYC orchestrate and not wanting to touch that data, ideally wanting to actually leave that with the user. But it needs to be something that is actually also available to serve the purpose of regulatory, the regulatory purpose that allows them to issue the card in the first place, to on-ramp people, to give credit, etc. So this is what we're focused on. And there we are glad to say that we just finished the regulatory audit, the legal audit. Marjorie's going to say a little bit about that, which was quite important to us. So a very holistic solution is coming together. So we're talking about seamless onboarding. I can't share too much here, but we are about to implement a solution that allows you to even sign a transaction and sign in using your face on your device. Meaning that doesn't matter where you are, in which ecosystem, you can always authenticate and sign in and potentially even use that, that address as a way to also hold tokens, if you like, solely based on your face, while having guaranteed privacy and no biometric information leaving your device. That thing is something I'm quite excited about. Oh, and it's available throughout your device family. So it's not just tied to just Apple devices or your mobile phone or something. And it brings you guaranteed uniqueness if you like. It's not a requirement in the idOS that you have uniqueness. But as a consumer of idOS credentials, you can enforce uniqueness. But all in all, you need to have an end-to-end solution. So you actually need to see and need to help people onboard using even KYC providers. You can't just say, well, we don't take care of that, right? We are not a KYC provider, and we will be working with the ones that actually are able to also delete the user data from the central database to make sure that we are as data privacy preserving as can be. platform risk are a huge point. If we kind of converge to Web 2 again, where we are converging towards the same centralized platforms that just offer it all very conveniently, we will find that when we build businesses on top of them, that not just our users' data is going to be misused, as we have already seen in the open finance stack world, but also that we are suddenly going to face competitors because, you know, my business profit margins are the platform's new white label products that they're going to launch. That's something that can't happen with the idOS, because we together decide what the TNCs are, what the protocol is that is executing that. That's a big factor, actually. Like the very big neobanks and wallets, they understand that. They don't want to just implement the one KYC provider that, you know, does it all for them, but where they lose control. Well, user data has gone from being the new oil to being the new big lie we've seen with Coinbase. I'm not saying, you know, that the idOS would have out of the gate prevented what happened with Coinbase. Many centralized hacks could have been prevented by that. We do not think that people's data needs to be in centralized storages, but people have woken up to the fact, or business leaders have woken up to the fact that that can be an event that kills a company, and rightfully so, and that there are ways to protect against that. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to hand this off to Louis, and we're going to see a demo soon as well.
Thank you, Julian. So just to summarize, we brought up many points, but what do we believe it's needed to have a better identity system on the internet? It's basically three things. The first one is privacy, so limit the data that leaves from the control of the user. Second one is security, like avoid points of failure by design. And the third one is that it needs to be useful, right? It needs to be useful from a UX, DX point of view, but it also needs to be useful for use cases that people want today. And there's a lot of innovation that we have seen in the space and great technologies, but unfortunately, many of these have not applied because they are solutions to problems that are not there today. And we hope not to fall into that and actually solve the big problems that we have today on onboarding of users for regulated use cases. So getting a little bit more specific, how does that look for idOS? And what can we do today with basically the technologies that we're integrating? So we look at the three different categories, again, privacy, security, and usability. And with what we have and what integrating, we're able to offer something that is at least better than anything that we have seen around. What does it mean in terms of privacy? So it means, for instance, that any biometric check, any picture, any PII, or anything that is a biometric never leaves the user device. It means that it's never stored anywhere. Like the checks happen in the user device, the OK happens there, it doesn't go beyond that. That you can actually bring data from many other places, that you don't limit who can verify data for you, for the user, but you can still authenticate, okay, that data is actually attested or verified by that other party. That as the user, you can control fully what do you add to your profile, not only what you share as well, but also what you add. And finally, that we don't force uniqueness into a user. That this idea that on the internet, you only have one profile and everything that you do in your life links to you, always to a biometric, it's risky, it's dangerous, especially if in the future there's technologies that could link what today is not able to be linked. So that's something that we believe it's a right that people should have in the internet and that we should then enforce by design. When it comes to security, I was talking before about that no single points of failure. That means MPC networks, that means distributed storage, that means that if one of the parts is offline, the system still can go on. So that's important. Anti-spoofing for the biometrics, there's a lot of posts when you look into social media of people using masks, of people actually impersonating others. There are systems and there's technology today that limits that to a very high degree. also enable multi-factor authentication in ways that are more advanced than what we see today with Essence, which is something that's very easy to hack, like link that to other points from the user that are much more secure, encrypt everything at the user level. So many points show that they encrypt the data at rest and while it moves, but they don't encrypt one user, one credential, or anything like that, which means that it's much easier to get access to a bunch of data by just breaking one encryption key. No middleman. What we have is code today. As we decentralize further, that also becomes distributed. And finally, that we, even though there's a lot of benefits of self-custody, that we also add ways how people can recover actually their identity or protect if someone is impersonating themselves and claim back their identity. And finally, into usability, Julian was talking about this before. We can abstract usability to the face of a user. It's not compulsory. That's something that can be chosen, but you can bring outside of one wallet in one chain, defining a user. We have a system that can work on any device as well. It doesn't need to onboard to specific devices or orbs or scans. It can work in any modern device that has a camera. It's agnostic outside of Web3 as well. It allows for reusability, and it also allows for reusability for its more important, which is for the use case that we're mainly focusing on, and it's our biggest mode, which is for data that is regulated like KYC or AML. I was saying before, and how does it compare to what's around? And without getting into much detail, if you can go to the next slide. But what we see as alternatives today, especially in the Web3 space, are three options. So it's what I would call the centralized biometric protocols. I'm sure that everyone knows what I'm referring to. Then we have the KYC providers or the in-house solutions like the big exchanges use. And we also have something in between, which is these centralized solutions together with no data proofs that often are on-chain in the form of soul-bound tokens or in the form of on-chain attestations. When we look at those and we look in detail at this analysis, and it's something that we are happy to provide if anyone is interested here, we believe that in each one of these categories that we discussed, so privacy, security, usability, is significantly better what we can build if we put more effort into specifically solving those challenges. But I think it's enough of talking about it, and maybe we show you a little bit how this should feel on a neobank implementation. So I would like actually to ask Ben, our CPO, to step in and show us a little bit a mock-up demo that right now we're actually properly building and integrating with different financial models in the space, but we wanted to show you a sneak peek of that.
Yeah, super excited to hear what you say. There's already a demo live, so reach out if you want to, just use the existing demo. But Ben, handing over to you.
Thanks, guys. So yeah, you will have maybe seen in our last Consortium Forum our live demo, which we're constantly iterating on and currently working to add some of this KYC sharing functionality with a couple live providers, Transact, Banxa, and a couple others we're looking at integrating. And it's important to note that we are integrating some providers now that do not actually have to implement our SDK. They have these KYC data receive APIs, and so we're demonstrating how actually the idOS can be used for KYC reusability today, right now, without our sort of passporting framework being widely adopted, which is kind of like the later part of the flywheel. But we have a sort of idealized demo here that I'll walk you through, which is kind of our North Star of like, what does the end game UX look like for a neobank using idOS? And so that's what I'm going to walk you through today, because that is informing a lot of how we build product in the interim. Give me 1 second here. All right, so this is our friendly neighborhood neobank. I am going to start by creating an account, and here we're going to use our first feature from idOS, which is going to be our native biometric module. This will be powered by Keyless. In the future, this will run on idOS nodes for increased privacy and trust minimization. So let's say that I scan my face here first to prove that I'm human, and I confirm that I've agreed to idOS biometric terms and conditions, just telling me that my data is stored in idOS. For this case, we assume neobank is a regulated entity, and so its onboarding also includes KYC. So I'm going to finish this process. Let's say it's powered by a fake KYC provider here we've called Verify. That could be any provider. I'm adding information. I'm now adding my document upload for KYC, and it's going to be verified by the KYC provider. And in this case, to write this to my profile, I'm actually signing with my face now. So I registered my face at the beginning, but since we can also use your face with our keyless implementation inside idOS as a signer, instead of just signing with a wallet, it can actually be your face. Now, this is both a UX unlock, but also for fintech use cases, can be a security unlock to prevent something called KYC muling, because in this case, if you enforce this requirement, the user, it has to be the same user that went through this flow, which is actually something that is quite difficult for regulated providers to deal with today. And we can bake in natively into the system in a privacy preserving way. So I finished my KYC with neobank. I agree to neobank's general terms and conditions, and I've completed my registration. And so now I want to on-ramp some funds. And so I'm going to go to add. We're going to use our fake on-ramp provider, on-ramp, just to buy some USDC. And I'm going to use Apple Pay. In this case, I've already been verified by neobank, so I can simply grant them KYC access through signing a message again. I've granted the access, and now I can go to the checkout. So that's an on-ramp example. And then let's say I want to add a neobank card. Typically, these cards are third-party providers, Rain, Kulipa, there's a number of them. In this case, we call the card provider Acme Card. So to add an Acme card, all I'm going to do is grant my KYC access, agree to Acme Card's terms and conditions, sign this message, and since they already have my address there on file, I'll just send it there. And now I've onboarded to add a card. Next, we'll show an example of going to a third-party app. We assume that this wallet neobank is implemented with Wallet Connect. It's a wallet that controls the user's private keys for them, or holds them for them. And so they're now connecting to a third-party dApp. We'll call this RWA-Fi. And I'm going to buy some regulated, permissioned secondary trading assets here, RT bond, let's say it's a tokenized treasury bill that for some reason needs to be KYC'd. So instead of KYCing, this app has our SDK implemented and can detect the idOS profile with a credential. And now, after connecting my account, I can grant my KYC access as well to RWA-Fi so that I can proceed with the swap. And I'm going to go here and finish the swap. And that's it. Any questions? This is sort of like our sort of North Star, if you will, for what a neobank, a crypto neobank can work like with idOS. I'll pause for questions. Otherwise, I'll hand it back to Luis. Ramona.
Hey guys, so I may have missed this in a previous call, and then sorry I joined late. I'm a little bit confused about this. Like, so is there a verification, right? I seem to remember there was a verification. It's like everybody who gets to share KYC with will be verified that they actually need that KYC, because normally we do have that sort of built-in requirement that if the customer already KYC'd with the bank, the other whatever plugins, interactions are not necessarily needing to access their KYC again. Is this going to become, like, my concern is more is like, because of the facility, the convenience of like, oh yes, reshare because it's already there, I don't have to do anything. Like the user, instead of just KYCing with one provider as they do now, it's a bit of a hassle, but yeah. They will end up like sharing their KYC with 20 people because simply the API plugins belong to different small bits and pieces, firms. So is there sort of a process to make sure that everybody's in that, like who's responsible for that? Like who's the data controller in this case?
I'm not sure, Marjorie, if you want to add some color to that as well, but in general, you're sharing that very dedicatedly with a receiving party, and that's what you're actually also signing. So the idOS is built around consent, meaning that you always share against a specific counterparty that is represented by a key that in the idOS is also exposing who they are in the request process. So very specifically asking, hey, I'm AcmeCard, are you willing to share this KYC data with me because I needed to be able to issue a card? Marjorie, I'm not sure if you want to add something there.
Yeah, so that was not exactly so like let me re-clarify for Marjorie. It's like in the normal process, right? It's like we go there, apply for a bank, and then we share with the bank, and then the bank is actually responsible under the law to make sure that anyone who accesses our private data is actually doing the proper, and they need to have access to it, and nobody who doesn't need to have access to it is getting. With consent, you can actually bypass some of these requirements because you consent to whatever terms they have, right, in their own commercial terms, including that they reuse, resell your data, whatever, right? So this is the trick that I don't understand. Is there someone screening that those terms are only required for compliance purposes versus the whatever API interaction actually has different terms and conditions, and when you click to share, is there like you're sharing more than you should have?
So basically, to add to what Julian said, and now to reply to your question, whenever there is two obliged entities or different entities that are requiring access to user data, they can actually tailor the flow to whatever data processing roles and needs that they actually have. Meaning that if, for example, you're AML obliged, but you want to base, let's say, on the performance of a contract, because maybe you want to collect certain data that is not part of AML allegations, you can tailor the message that is shown to the user, so you can actually provide the proper language that will fit your own data processing needs. So if you're a controller and you want to base it on consent, you're able to show the consent language that you want to the user, and the processing that happens will be based on that. So there's flexibility enough on the flow for the data controllers to actually build the language that is necessary for each of them to interact with the user compliantly.
Okay, that's great. And then a follow-up question, I don't want to be a pain, but actually it's good to be a pain now, in terms of rather than later. Would the user be able to see, hey, these are all the entities that actually I share KYC with, and these are the countries they're in?
So on the dashboard, the user is able to see all the access grants, that's what we call internally and externally as well, that they gave, and they are able to revoke that if there's no time lock. So they can manage through the dashboard all the access grants that were given, and also the right grants that were given as well. And that will also exist on the data consumer side, so they can see the access grants that they were given from which users as well.
Okay, sounds good. So if I were a privacy concerned user, I would go periodically, screen my dashboard, or like, who are these guys? I've never heard of them. Or what countries is this? It's like, no. And then remove my consent, and then they would only be able to keep the access that's purely required for their own compliance purposes.
Yeah,
Exactly.
That's what the time locks are for. So basically, if you need to retain access for, let's say, 7 years, whenever we request the access grant, you can request that from the user and say explicitly, look, I need to keep your data for this amount of time, and you're granting access for this period. And if the user tries to revoke, specifically to that credential that they gave access to this specific third party, they would not be able to. They could still delete from their profiles if they want, but not from the access that has been given to that third party. So they can actually leave the data only stored there. They don't need to replicate on like central database they want to keep internally. And they can retain access for the period that was agreed. That's what we call time locks, basically.
And how about the people having access? Are they able to download like massively for their, like every month is like I'm downloading all the KYC, or yes or no?
That was in our roadmap, but Julian or Ben, if you want to jump in terms of if that's already live.
Yeah, if you can see data, you can always replicate it, right? This is always the case. We strongly encourage folks in the future to not download that data because there's really no point to it. It becomes stale. You need to protect it. You need to also comply with GDPR laws, all these things. So why not just use it directly from the idOS? That gives everyone an easier time, especially because, you know, users can control it, which is in line with GDPR 100%. But yeah, that's indeed something that we cannot protect from. There are solutions in the future. We're talking, you know, more in a year spectrum on feature sets where we can also control the read flows. And with control, I mean us as the protocol. So as the network decentralizes, this is also something that not an individual node provider can control or change. But we're talking about data sharding, for example, here as potential solutions in the future. All right. Thank you, Ramona. So let's talk a little bit why we can spin this up. I mean, we're up against competitors that might or might not be in our direct space that have a lot more resources available to us. One big thing is the power of open source and our ability to, as a result, work with different partners because we're kind of just like building the whole thing together. With Matthias here on the call from Partija, we're about to finalize the MPC implementation. You know, this is just like a whole team that is external that has been working on that for years and years, advising governments, building solutions in the corporate space that is helping us spin this up. Same for Quill, same for Keyless, where we have been talking about the biometric software. We have Resonance to also check our stack and Subvisual as a building partner that helps us put some of these things together. And so that's really our big advantage, is that we can just add features because we're building on a joint stack. So everyone implementing the idOS will enjoy new features overnight, whereas you build this in isolation, you don't just need to maintain that and make sure that, you know, the whole stack doesn't need an update, etc., is still secure. You will need to build all of these features yourself or even come up with that. It's basically an ability to have upgrades while you're asleep. Same for UX. This is super important to us. We feel with the biometric, keyless biometric implementation, we might even be able to leapfrog regular fintech, because 2FA that even confirms that you're still the right person, that, you know, like number 26, the German neobank just got fined for and got put under provisionings for 1.5 years to not onboard more than X thousand users because they had such a massive problem with identity muling that they have just been released from. And so as a crypto space, we can just kind of leapfrog those fintech providers. Yeah, and reducing the barrier to integration. Otherwise, everyone needs to do that themselves and take care of compliance. I want to add a point here, which is AI, like being able to fight off bot armies that become better and better, that we will not be able to identify if you do not have like a massive team on top of hardening your onboarding funnel, is something that regular teams will not be able to take care of if that's just their only if it's not their only job, because they still need to build like the core business, which could be the cards, could be on-ramps, but certainly isn't KYC. So, Marjorie, this has been your feed, so I'm going to shut up. But this is quite exciting here.
Yeah, I would like to briefly just mention that we've been working with Taylor Westing for the last couple of months. It has been quite intense, but the idea was to kind of vet the whole idOS compliance stack. It covered like storage capabilities. It focused a lot on the KYC orchestration and reusability frameworks, namely passporting and data ingestion. And also, and this is aligned as well with what Ramona brought up, like the flexibility it allows data controllers to tailor their user-facing flows to comply with their own obligations, because idOS cannot take those roles, but we can definitely make it easier for them. And Taylor Westing concluded that the system balances innovation and regulatory compliance, providing a decentralized infrastructure for data storage and permission sharing. Passporting and data ingestion frameworks were found to offer significant potential to reduce friction in a customer onboarding process, and without compromising the regulatory frameworks that obliged entities are, well, mandatorily need to comply, and especially data protection requirements as well. And I actually would love for Marina as well to kind of jump in and tell you a bit more of what we've been doing with EUCI recently. And Marina, I'll give you the floor.
Hi, nice to meet you all. So EUCI, just for everyone that is not familiar with what we do, we're working on policy in Brussels mostly, so very European focused. And what we have been doing with idOS lately, it's mostly working on events we hosted together. In a way, I was a guest, a brilliant event breakfast discussing different topics, specifically on anti-money laundering, transfer of funds regulation, etc. And we had a lot of very interesting guests there talking about kind of the intersection between regulation, especially in Europe, and then also all the potential that different, I would say, blockchain, but also more open frameworks would be offering to the users. So, of course, thinking about idOS solutions as well. And another thing that might be interesting for you, very much related to all the work that you have done in the past and you will continue to do, is a lot of work on the anti-money laundering regulation and data protection. So if you have probably seen, the European Data Protection Board has issued guidance on how to basically comply with GDPR if you're using blockchain. These guidance are pretty terrible. They're mostly saying almost all the solutions that we have out today, if we think about the public blockchain, are not compliant with GDPR. This is not a law. It's really just a guidance. So it's not basically directly saying it as a, in a way having a very strong legal force, but at the same time, a lot of authorities are influenced by those guidance. So right now, together with Marjorie, we're basically writing a response and saying that, we don't agree with most of the points there. We're sending this response on Monday, which is the deadline for us to respond to the guidance. And then, of course, in the next months, we're continuously going to monitor the situation and hopefully also reopen GDPR to be adjusted to some of the technical innovations that are happening in the space, including blockchain. So it is pretty important, I would say, if in a way this guidance would be taken very seriously, literally in a way they're written, I would say that most of the blockchain industry in Europe would just be right dead. So it is a serious thing, but at the same time, we do hope that this is not going to be taken into consideration and in a way also being enforced. The second part is anti-money laundering is continuously something that we're working on. Most of the documentation regulations are already finalized, but what we're doing right now, and it's going to be pretty important or even more, it's really being involved in the secondary technical process, which means that whenever the European Banking Authority at this moment is writing any type of guidance or standards on the implementation of the anti-money laundering regulation, for example, we're giving feedback to that as well. And there's going to be, I would say, your opinion, especially, from a legal point of view, it's going to be very, very useful, because usually when they do write and work on the secondary technical process, they really go into details, and you are working with this, topics daily, so you will really know in which direction to comment and in which direction to basically propose solutions or give negative or positive feedback or anything that they're writing. But just to make sure that everyone also from the audience knows, the anti-money laundering regulation directive, the other frameworks are finalized on level 1, which means as laws, they are final. We're going to work more on the details on implementation. So I think that's mostly, very briefly, coming from the European regulatory side, but I think very, very important topics, and we're very lucky to have you as a partner and member, just because of all the knowledge that you're bringing specifically to those 2 topics.
Yeah, thank you, Marina,
Thanks, Marina.
for bringing it up. Yeah, Ramona?
Yeah, sorry guys, but I'm taking advantage of Marina's presence to ask about something European related, because I've been watching the European Digital Identity Project and how they want to push it. And I just wanted to ask for your opinions, like how the 2 projects would actually be compatible.
I think that might be very interesting. I'm not really, I would say, an expert on the identity project coming from the EU. My understanding is that they're working towards finalization as well. For example, we've been in touch with some teams that are working on a technical side on basically showing solution or implementation on ZK as well. But I would say that just in general, whenever, let's say, EU regulator would basically prescribe a specific identity solution, will probably be this solution. So whenever a prescribed solution need to be in a way named specifically, and that might be the one that they're working on. In this case, I think it's impossible for any other private partner to basically propose their own solutions that have not been endorsed by the regulators. But yeah, I am sorry, I cannot share more at this moment.
No, but strategically, I think it would be important to sort of study and try to map out how idOS would be very good fit and sort of with what they're doing, and then respond to their concerns on the ZK part. And then because they will push it out, right? They are working on this, and like they are doing it. Right? Yeah.
Yeah, this is why I was so happy to have you, Marina, as host, to understand how policy is shaping up, and talking about drawing attention to not just regulatory change, but also in general. That's something that you as consortium and building partners, that's something where we need your help with. We see that data security should matter also when data breaches are not happening and it's not top of mind. And there's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem, right? Like we need to shift the equilibrium of what is acceptable in the public eye towards having data privacy minimization solutions in place that put the user front and center. But right now, people hide behind the fact that, this is how everyone's doing it. We even have projects that are launching that say, well, we don't touch user data. Yeah, you don't, but like you're just hiding all that dirty laundry under one blanket, which is called centralized KYC providers. And that is just something that we need to change. User data shouldn't be duplicated. We should have data deletion, and ideally treat data like we treat our coins, which is ideally in a self-custodial setup. And this is why we partnered with ecosystem partners with chains, because we have a common cause here to push people to go from centralized to decentralized, because we might have 400 or 500 million people in crypto, but those are usually still on centralized exchange avenues. And this is just something that we're all working towards to change it, to have a more transparent, even financial system, something that we also believe regulators are not too uncomfortable with if something is transparent and for the user. So that's what we are asking you to do, to kind of draw attention to that problem. We need to understand where can we be helpful, what is missing in the offering that we have just shown you. And do you know teams in your ecosystem? Are you such a team that wants to use the idOS to be able to seamlessly onboard and orchestrate KYC data and maybe even use it beyond, right? To fight identity muling, to make your user experience a lot better because they do not need to have even any wallet being set up to start with. So yeah, that's it from us. Thanks a lot. We will be sharing our recording here. So also if you're just watching this after the actual presentation happening, please reach out to us. We're always available on Twitter, for example. And we're still here to answer questions that you might have.